Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Locke. I'm going to get right into it because I'm trying to make up a little bit of time, and I'm going to start with a video. I am a co-editor of a volume that just came out last week, and the video will start to explain it, and then I will go into a little bit more detail. Is the video ready? Yeah, the video? We had some tech issues.
Una forma de ser alguien, ¿no? Es una cuestión muy identitaria.
Identity-based violence is any harm that is physical or structural, motivated or legitimized by how the perpetrators conceive their victim's identity.
Sexual and gender-based violence is actually a global problem. 1 in 3 women experience some form of it at least once in their lifetime.
The violence that is enacted on Black bodies in the school community is one that is dependent on maintaining the status quo of violence towards and darkened peoples.
Growing up, I saw abuse, gang violence, rape, and so I grew up with a lot of fear.
Storytelling helps you open up the space to say, I'm no longer a victim, I'm a survivor, and I'm not alone.
Sin embargo, con el paso de la estrategia de alto el fuego, pues nos damos cuenta que realmente no es la colonia lo que es violento como tal, sino que son ciertos grupos de personas los que están generando violencia entre ellos uno y otra vez.
The school community used the restorative tools to see conflict as generative and be able to understand the violence that Black children were experiencing.
With an understanding of trauma, people are learning how can we be agents of peace? How can we spread hope, peace, resilience?
Storytelling is absolutely powerful. So what do we do with these stories?
No? Yes, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about the contents of this book for a little while and how it came to be. When we think of mass atrocities, we often think about spectacular events. The genocide in Rwanda, the Srebrenica massacre, or more recently, killings in Bucha or Erasure. When we think about urban violence, we often think about interpersonal violence, or the form of violence that takes place in community, but often is occurring at the hands of people who have familiarity with one another, or, as we saw recently in Rio de Janeiro, that takes place at the hands of security agents and police. And when we think about identity-based violence, we often think about particular groups of people who, because of their identity, are more at risk of violence than others. Women, LGBTQ identifying individuals, racial minorities, migrants, etc. Our brains love categories. We need to be able to put ideas into boxes, into some kind of order. This is really important to be able to understand the world, and particularly during complex times. But when we don't question these categories, they can lead to really significant errors in assumptions that lead to errors in policy and errors in fundamental understanding of one another. So this book started with myself and my co-editors asking a pretty simple question about how the boxes that we use to understand and discuss violence limit or confine our imagination, and how through an exploration that is multidisciplinary and creative, we may be able to break through these categories into a future that is fundamentally more humane and more peaceful. So I'm going to actually mess around with these slides quite a bit because they're in the wrong order, my fault. I'm going to put on here a poem from one of our contributors. I won't read it, but I'll just leave it up there for a few minutes. So I'm going to start again. I'm going to break down the boxes. What if we think not only about Srebrenica and Bucha and Erasure, but also Grenfell Tower in London, or the poisoning of Flint, Michigan's water supply, the epidemic of violence against women in the world, the predation of migrants fleeing fear and violence only to be met with more fear and violence, the formal and informal segregation of cities that makes it clear to some young people of color where they are and are not allowed to tread, or education systems that fail to protect some in favor of the other. And what if we think about all of that together? I know that our brains will push back. These are different types of harm. The scale is different, the intentionality is different. That is true. But also, perhaps we're not looking closely enough. Perhaps we're not exploring deeply enough whose experience of violence matters, whose definition of violence matters, whose data counts as evidence, whose narratives of protection justifies violence against some, thereby erasing harm caused in the name of protection. Perhaps we're not looking hard enough at how generations of indignities and harms calcify systems of domination and exclusion, or how our media and power centers train the eye on certain events while asking us to look away from other events. And perhaps we're not questioning how the ways that we've been trained, our pedagogical tools, have helped or hindered our ability to fully appreciate the scope of violence in the world today. Perhaps we're not sufficiently confronting how the stories that are told, and indeed that we tell, of violence, of villains and saviors, criminals and protectors, harmed and harmful, how these narratives shape the range of policy options or responses that are used to treat violence. With this volume, we wanted to unpack all these questions, but we didn't want to do that out of a purely academic or theoretical desire. We wanted to do so in a way that could actually lead to shifts in policy and practice. So the unprecedented, here again, I'm going to mess with the slides. Yeah. The unprecedented movement of humanity into urban communities that is taking place in the world today created an opportunity to explore these ideas and these questions in very concrete and practical spaces. Cities are the places where the majority of humanity currently and in the future reside. They are places of gathering, places that bring together a range of different people, backgrounds, ages, aspirations, traditions, beliefs. As gathering places, they provide space where constant negotiation across difference is required. And in this space for negotiation, there's incredible opportunity for healing, for growth, and for human flourishing. As gathering places, however, they are also targets of opportunity for domination by some at the expense of others, for criminal and illicit activity, for infliction of large-scale harm as a strategy of war, and as places that can manipulate fear in the interest of creating divisions that reinforce certain power centers. The leveraging of identity is crucial to all of this, both in imagining peaceful futures and more destructive ones. Nearly all forms of mass violence that take place in the world today target people according to their identity, whether explicitly or implicitly. So because of all this, it was really crucial to explore the questions I posed above, but with a focus on the way in which identity is manipulated, criminalized, demonized, victimized, silenced, undermined, and ignored. No. 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 Yep. You knew it was going to come. At the end of the day, what this volume tells us is clear. That instances of harm do not just pop up out of nowhere. Harm is born out of legacies of abuse and policy that dehumanize some, making some lives less valuable than others. That because structural violence is a precondition for atrocity violence, preventing atrocities demands moving beyond the optical facade of immediate peril. That ending destruction, physical destruction, is by no means the end of suffering. And that true reconciliation can only happen when we listen to the voices of those that are silenced, the voices of those who have been hurt, and the voices of those who have caused harm. Mass violence is not just the blowing up of places. It says more than that, but I'm being given a 1-minute warning. Mass violence is not just the blowing up of places of worship or the razing of entire communities. It is absolutely these awful, spectacular events. But it is also the systematic denial of fundamental human rights to certain people, or the poisoning of food and water supplies, the torture that takes place in corrections institutions, the disappearance of certain members of society without due process, the denial of housing rights, and freedom of movement across cities. All of these are made possible by certain narratives, certain strategies, certain prejudices that privilege some at the expense of the other. But let me leave it on a positive note, because this volume, as you can see from the picture, if it's the right one, is filled with stories of healing and transformation, of community building, overcoming fear and hate. It shares concrete, actionable tools that we can move forward through our institutions, at the individual level, through the very language that we speak, and the narratives that we choose to replicate or not. This volume begins with each of us trying to better understand one another. We explore ideas from theory to practice to personal narrative. And I wanted to leave this up because this is a slide of nearly all of our contributors, which includes academics, policymakers, practitioners, artists, individuals with lived experience. We included all of their contributions in whatever way they wanted to share their contributions. We didn't force them into a particular presentation style. I encourage you all to take a look at the volume. It is open access, so it is free and free to share, and you can find the volume as well as more videos and personal testimony on our website, ibmv.org, and both myself and Elsa Marie, who's sitting here with us, were contributors and would be happy to share more about the volume. Thank you very much.